Blood stained the pristine white snow a shocking crimson as Xavier Anderson struggled through the biting cold of the Montana winter. The howling wind threatened to knock him from his horse as he squinted against the blinding whiteness stretching across the barren landscape. It was December 1873, and the young rancher was beginning to regret his decision to check his northern fence line before the next storm hit. Xavier tugged his worn leather gloves higher and adjusted his hat lower over his eyes. At 27, he'd survived worse conditions, but there was something particularly merciless about this stretch of winter. 3 weeks with barely a break in the snowfall had tested even the most seasoned residents of Fort McDowell. "Just a little further, Rusty," he encouraged his chestnut gelding, patting the animal's neck. "Then we'll head back to the warm barn." The horse snorted, sending clouds of steam into the frigid air as they crested a small hill. Xavier pulled sharply on the reins, causing Rusty to halt abruptly. There, half buried in a snowdrift against a fallen log, lay what appeared to be a body. "Good Lord," Xavier breathed, dismounting quickly. His boots sank deep into the snow as he trudged toward the still form. Reaching down, he brushed away the fresh powder covering what he now saw was a woman. Her face was deathly pale, lips blue with cold. A thin shawl completely inadequate for the brutal Montana winter was wrapped around her shoulders. Beneath it, her dress was torn and blood-stained. A small leather bag lay nearby, its contents scattered by the wind. Xavier pressed his fingers to her neck, surprised to find a faint pulse. Miss, can you hear me?" When she didn't respond, Xavier knew he had minutes, not hours, to get her somewhere warm. He gathered her limp form into his arms, shocked at how little she weighed. She couldn't have been older than 22 or 23, with dark hair that spilled from beneath a simple bonnet. "Hang on," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. With practiced efficiency, Xavier mounted Rusty with the woman cradled against his chest and turned toward home. The journey back to his ranch seemed interminable. The woman remained unconscious, and Xavier found himself constantly checking to ensure she was still breathing. By the time his modest homestead came into view, her breathing had grown so shallow he feared he might be too late. Xavier's cabin stood solidly against the backdrop of snow-covered pine trees. It wasn't fancy, just a sturdy 2-bedroom structure with a barn and corral nearby, but it was his, built with his own hands after years of saving and planning. He dismounted carefully, keeping the woman secure in his arms as he kicked open the door to his home. The warmth from the still burning fire greeted them, and Xavier silently thanked his habit of banking the coals before leaving, even for short trips. "Let's get you warm," he said, laying her gently on his bed. Her skin was ice-cold to the touch as Xavier worked to remove her wet outer clothing. It felt improper, but he knew hypothermia would kill her if he didn't act quickly. Once he'd covered her with every blanket he owned, Xavier stoked the fire to blazing and put water on to boil. Next, he examined the wound on her side, a deep gash that had thankfully stopped bleeding but would need cleaning and stitching. As the cabin warmed, Xavier prepared needle and thread, along with the whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. He'd stitched up his share of injuries over the years, an inevitable skill for a man living alone in the territory. "This is going to hurt, miss," he said, though she remained unconscious. "I apologize in advance." Xavier worked methodically, cleaning and closing the wound before bandaging it with strips of clean cotton. Throughout the procedure, the woman never stirred, which worried him almost more than the injury itself. With the immediate danger addressed, Xavier settled into a chair beside the bed. Night had fallen, and the storm he'd been anticipating began to rage outside, pelting the windows with ice and snow. He would be unable to fetch the doctor until the weather cleared. "You picked a hell of a time to get yourself in trouble," he murmured, studying her face in the firelight. Despite the pallor of near freezing, she was undeniably beautiful, with delicate features and long lashes that fanned against her cheeks. Xavier wondered what circumstances had brought her to that snowdrift. A woman traveling alone in this part of Montana, especially in winter, was unusual enough to raise questions. The bloodstain on her dress suggested violence rather than accident. For hours, Xavier kept vigil, periodically checking her pulse and refreshing the cool cloth on her forehead when fever set in. It was near midnight when she finally stirred, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal striking green eyes filled with confusion and fear. Where her voice broke, hardly more than a rasp. "You're safe," Xavier assured her, offering water. "I found you in the snow. My name's Xavier Anderson. This is my ranch about 10 miles outside Fort McDowell." She accepted the water cautiously, her hands trembling so badly that Xavier had to help her steady the cup. After a few sips, she sank back against the pillows, visibly exhausted by even that small effort. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Morgan." "Miss Morgan," Xavier acknowledged. "That's a nasty cut you've got. Can you tell me what happened?" Fear flashed across her face, and she instinctively tried to sit up, only to fall back with a pained gasp. "Easy now," Xavier cautioned. "You're in no condition to be moving about." "They'll come looking," she said, her voice thin with panic. "I can't stay here. I've put you in danger already." Xavier frowned. "Who will come looking? Are you in some kind of trouble?" Lily closed her eyes, tears seeping from beneath her lashes. "I escaped. They'll kill me when they find me." Before Xavier could press for more details, she slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving him with more questions than answers. He checked her bandages, relieved to find no fresh bleeding, then resumed his post in the chair. The storm continued through the night, howling around the cabin like a pack of wolves. Xavier dozed intermittently, waking at the slightest sound from his patient. By dawn, her fever had broken and her breathing had steadied to a more natural rhythm. Xavier prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge, his mind turning over the cryptic information Lily had shared. The territory had its share of outlaws and desperate men, but the terror in her eyes suggested something specifically targeted, not a random act of violence. When Lily woke again, she seemed more coherent, though wariness remained etched in her expression. She accepted the porridge with murmured thanks, eating slowly as if unaccustomed to food. "The storm's let up," Xavier informed her, pouring himself coffee. "I should be able to fetch the doctor from town once I've tended to the animals." Lily lowered her spoon. "Please, no doctor. No one can know I'm here." Xavier studied her across the small table he'd moved beside the bed. "Miss Morgan, that wound needs proper treatment." "I did what I could, but—" "You did fine," she interrupted. "Better than fine. I'm alive because of you." She hesitated, then added, "I worked as a nurse's assistant during the war. I know what infection looks like. This is clean." The Civil War had ended 8 years ago, which meant she must have been quite young when serving. Xavier calculated she couldn't be older than 23 now. "All right," he conceded. "No doctor for now, but you need to tell me what's going on. Who are you running from?" Lily's fingers twisted in the blanket. "My stepfather," she finally said. "Franklin Mercer. He owns the Golden Spur Saloon in Virginia City." Xavier knew the establishment by reputation, an upscale gambling hall and saloon that catered to wealthy miners and ranchers. He'd never visited himself, preferring the simpler pleasures of Fort McDowell's modest saloon on the rare occasions he went to town. "He's a dangerous man," Lily continued. "More dangerous than most people realize. After my mother died last spring, She swallowed hard. "He decided I would work for him. Not serving drinks or cooking. He has other girls for that. Understanding dawned on Xavier and anger flared in his chest. He tried to force you into prostitution. Lily nodded, unable to meet his eyes. I refused. He locked me in a room for days. Said he'd break me eventually. That's when I realized I had to escape. And the injury, one of his men caught me leaving. He had a knife. Her voice grew distant. I fought back harder than he expected. I think I might have killed him. Xavier absorbed this information silently. Self-defense was understood in the territory, but the law was complicated when it came to women defending themselves against men. I stole a horse, Lily continued. Rode as far and as fast as I could, but the storm came and I got lost. The horse spooked at something and threw me. That's the last thing I remember before waking up here. Xavier nodded slowly. Virginia City's a good 80 miles from here. You made it quite a distance. He has connections all through the territory, Lily said. Men who owe him favors. Once he realizes I'm gone, you think he'd come this far to find you. I know things, Lily said softly. Things that could ruin him. And Franklin Mercer doesn't forgive people who cross him. Xavier rose and moved to the window, watching as sunlight sparkled across the fresh snow. He'd come to Montana to build something of his own, something honest, after years of drifting from ranch to ranch across the West. He'd deliberately chosen a quiet life, away from complications. Yet here was complication personified, in the form of an injured woman with dangerous secrets. The sensible choice would be to help her recover, then send her on her way, perhaps with enough money to reach Oregon or California, somewhere beyond her stepfather's reach. You can stay until you're healed, Xavier said finally. After that, we'll figure something out. Relief washed over Lily's face. Thank you. I'll earn my keep, I promise. I can cook and clean, mend clothing. I'm stronger than I look. Xavier smiled slightly. Let's get you well first. For now, rest is what you need most. Over the next few days, Lily's strength gradually returned. The wound began healing cleanly, and color returned to her cheeks. Xavier kept busy with ranch work, repairing damage from the storm and caring for his small herd of cattle. Though still weak, Lily insisted on helping with indoor tasks. Xavier returned from the barn one afternoon to find her at the stove, stirring a pot of stew that smelled better than anything that had come out of his kitchen in years. You should be resting, he admonished, though without much conviction. I was going crazy just lying there, Lily replied. Besides, cooking while sitting isn't too taxing. She gestured to the chair she'd pulled up to the stove. Xavier removed his coat and hat, hanging them by the door. Smells like you know your way around a kitchen. My mother taught me. Before she married Franklin, we had a small boarding house in St. Louis. I learned to cook for a dozen hungry workers every day. How'd you end up in Montana? Xavier asked, washing his hands in the basin. Lily's expression darkened. Franklin came through as a guest, charmed my mother completely. Promised her a better life out west, where he had business interests. She believed him. By the time we realized what kind of business he was really in, we were too far from home with no money to return. Xavier nodded, understanding all too well how dreams of a fresh start in the West could turn sour. He'd seen it happen to plenty of folks who weren't prepared for the harsh realities of frontier life. What about you? Lily asked, changing the subject. You're young to have your own ranch. Xavier leaned against the counter, watching as she added seasoning to the stew. Worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas for years, saved every penny. Fought briefly in the war, then went back to ranching. Came up to Montana in '67, worked for the Double T for 4 years while I scouted land. Bought this place 2 years ago. No family, Lily asked hesitantly. Parents died when I was 16. No siblings. Xavier didn't elaborate on the fever that had taken both his mother and father within days of each other, leaving him alone to make his way in the world. "What about you? Any family besides your mother?" Lily shook her head. "It was always just the two of us. My father died before I was born." They fell into a companionable silence as Lily continued cooking and Xavier set the table. There was something soothing about the domestic scene, so different from his usual solitary meals. The stew was as delicious as it smelled, rich with vegetables from Xavier's root cellar and tender beef. They ate quietly, the crackle of the fire and occasional howl of wind the only sounds. "Thank you," Lily said suddenly, setting down her spoon. "Not just for saving my life, but for believing me, for not asking questions I can't answer." Xavier met her gaze steadily. "Out here, most folks are running from something or towards something, sometimes both. It's not my place to judge." That night, Xavier insisted on taking the floor while Lily continued to use his bed. Despite her protests that she could sleep on the small sofa, he was adamant that her injury needed the comfort of a proper mattress to heal correctly. As January progressed, they fell into a routine. Xavier handled the outside work, while Lily gradually took over the household tasks. Her cooking transformed simple ingredients into meals that Xavier looked forward to with unprecedented enthusiasm. She found his mother's old sewing basket and mended his work shirts that had been waiting years for attention. They spent evenings by the fire, Xavier reading aloud from one of the few books he owned while Lily worked on knitting a new scarf from wool she'd found in a trunk. The domesticity of it was foreign to Xavier, yet strangely comforting. One evening, about 3 weeks after he'd found her, Lily broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "I should leave soon," she said quietly, her hands stilling on her knitting. "I've imposed on your kindness long enough." Xavier looked up from his book. "Where would you go?" "West, I suppose. Oregon, maybe. I hear women can file homestead claims there." "You have money for such a journey." Lily's silence was answer enough. "Winter's not over," Xavier pointed out. "The mountain passes won't be clear for months. Spring would be a safer time to travel." "I can't stay here indefinitely," Lily protested. "You've already done too much." Xavier set his book aside. "Miss Morgan, Lily having you here has been—" He searched for the right words. "It's been nice having someone to talk to." "The cabin's warmer with you in it." Lily looked down, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "That's kind of you to say." "It's the truth." Xavier hesitated. "Stay until spring. By then, you'll be fully healed and I can spare enough to get you to Oregon safely." "I couldn't accept your money," Lily said firmly. "Consider it payment for the cooking," Xavier replied with a smile. "Best meals I've had in years." The decision to remain until spring seemed to release some tension in Lily. She began moving about more freely, exploring the small cabin and the immediate surroundings when weather permitted. Xavier noticed how she would stand on the porch, face turned up to the sun on clear days, as if soaking in freedom itself. He found himself watching her more than he should, noticing the graceful way she moved, the determined set of her jaw when tackling a difficult task, the rare but transformative smile that occasionally broke through her careful reserve. February brought a brief thaw, allowing Xavier to make a necessary trip into Fort McDowell for supplies. Lily helped him prepare a list, then retreated to the bedroom while he readied the wagon. "I'll be back by nightfall," Xavier told her. "Keep the door barred. If anyone comes, hide in the root cellar," Lily finished. "I remember." Xavier hesitated, reluctant to leave her alone but unable to delay the trip any longer. They were running low on essentials, and he needed to check his mail and settle accounts at the general store. "Be careful," Lily said softly. The journey to town took nearly 2 hours over roads still partially blocked with snow. Fort McDowell had grown considerably in the 6 years since Xavier had first arrived in Montana, though it remained modest compared to larger settlements like Helena or Virginia City. The general store served as the center of community life, and Xavier spent more time there than planned, catching up on local news with the proprietor, Herman Schultz, and several neighboring ranchers. He carefully avoided mentioning his house guest, instead focusing conversation on cattle prices and predictions for spring weather. "Mail came through yesterday," Herman informed him, handing over several letters. "Been held up with the snow." Xavier tucked the mail into his coat pocket without examining it. "Appreciate it. Need flour, coffee, sugar, and whatever you've got in the way of fresh vegetables." While Herman filled his order, Xavier browsed the store, adding items to his purchase that he normally wouldn't consider: a small bottle of rose water, a length of blue ribbon, a tin of hard candies, small luxuries that might bring Lily pleasure. "Buying pretty things, Anderson?" Herman asked with a knowing smile as he wrapped the items. "Something you ain't telling us." Xavier kept his expression neutral. "Just restocking for spring." The older man chuckled. "Sure you are. That'll be $12.43. After settling his bill, Xavier loaded his purchases into the wagon and headed to the saloon for a quick meal before starting home. The Rusty Nail was nothing fancy, just a long bar, a few tables, and a small kitchen that served basic but filling food. Xavier had just finished his stew when Marshal Thomas Jenkins entered, scanning the room before spotting him. "Anderson," Jenkins greeted, sliding into the chair opposite. "Been a while since you've been to town." "Weather's been against it," Xavier replied, instantly wary. The marshal was a fair man, but his arrival felt too deliberate to be coincidental. Jenkins nodded, accepting this. "Got something I wanted to ask you about." He lowered his voice. "There's been inquiries from Virginia City about a missing woman. Young, dark-haired, might be injured. Name's Lily Morgan." Xavier's pulse quickened, but he kept his face impassive. "What about her?" "Her stepfather's offering a substantial reward. Claims she's unstable, stole from him, attacked one of his employees. Dangerous, according to him." "Sounds concerning," Xavier said neutrally. "What does this have to do with me?" Jenkins studied him. "Your ranch is on the route someone might take heading north from Virginia City. Thought you might have seen something, being isolated out there." Xavier met the marshal's gaze steadily. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Been focused on my own affairs." Jenkins nodded slowly. "Well, if you do, send word, though between us." He glanced around before continuing. "I've heard stories about Mercer and his establishment, not all above board if you take my meaning. Makes me wonder if there's more to this situation than he's letting on." Xavier felt a flicker of hope at the marshal's implied skepticism. "I'll keep that in mind." "Do that." Jenkins rose. "And Anderson, be careful out there. Strange folk on the roads these days." The warning hung in the air as Jenkins departed, leaving Xavier to wonder if it had been meant as friendly advice or something more pointed. The return journey seemed to take twice as long as Xavier's mind raced with the implications of the marshal's visit. If Mercer was making official inquiries, his search for Lily was more extensive than they'd anticipated. The fact that he'd fabricated a story about theft and violence confirmed Lily's assessment of his character. Xavier reached the ranch just as dusk was settling, a light snow beginning to fall. He found Lily anxiously watching from the window, relief washing over her face as he approached. "I was getting worried," she admitted as he carried in supplies. "The snow started and I thought." "Just took longer in town than expected," Xavier assured her. "Everything all right here?" Lily nodded, helping unpack the purchases. She paused when she discovered the personal items he'd bought, her fingers lightly touching the ribbon. "These are lovely," she said softly. "But you shouldn't have spent money on—" "I wanted to," Xavier interrupted. "Thought they might cheer you up." A genuine smile spread across her face, the kind that reached her eyes and transformed her features. "Thank you." Xavier turned away, suddenly flustered by her gratitude. "There's something you should know," he said, removing his coat. "The marshal approached me in town. Your stepfather's looking for you, offering a reward." The color drained from Lily's face. "What did you tell him?" "That I hadn't seen anyone matching your description." Xavier moved to the fire, adding wood. "But he knows my ranch is on a possible route north from Virginia City." "Do you think he believed you?" Xavier considered the question. "I'm not sure. Jenkins seemed skeptical of Mercer's story, which works in our favor, but we should be more cautious. No more standing on the porch in daylight." Lily sank into a chair. "I'm putting you at risk just by being here." "I made my choice when I brought you home," Xavier said firmly. "I don't regret it." Their eyes met across the room, a moment of understanding passing between them. Xavier was the first to look away, unused to the intensity of connection. "I'll check on the animals," he said, reaching for his coat again. "Then we can have dinner." In the barn, Xavier took longer than necessary with the evening chores, needing time to sort through his conflicted feelings. In just a month, Lily had become integral to his daily life in a way he hadn't anticipated. The thought of her leaving in spring created an uncomfortable hollow feeling he wasn't ready to examine too closely. When he returned to the cabin, he found Lily had prepared a special meal with some of the fresh supplies. She'd even used the rose water to scent the small cake she'd baked for dessert. "A celebration," she explained, "for your safe return." They ate by candlelight, sharing stories of their lives before Montana. Xavier told her about his first cattle drive at 16, the terrifying river crossing that had nearly cost him his life. Lily described growing up in St. Louis, the diverse boarders who'd passed through her mother's establishment, the books she'd borrowed from a kindly professor who'd stayed with them for a year. "I miss reading," she confessed. "Your books are wonderful, but I've nearly memorized them all." "I'll get more next time I'm in town," Xavier promised. "What do you like?" "Everything. History, adventure stories, poetry." Her eyes brightened with enthusiasm. "I once read an account of a woman who traveled alone through the Amazon. Can you imagine such courage?" "I don't have to imagine," Xavier said quietly. "I found that courage half frozen in the snow." Lily's gaze dropped to her plate, but not before Xavier caught the pleased flush on her cheeks. After dinner, they sat before the fire as usual, but something had shifted between them. A new awareness hummed in the air, making ordinary movements seem significant. Casual glances waited with unspoken meaning. When Lily finally rose to retire, she paused beside Xavier's chair. "Thank you for today, for everything." Without thinking, Xavier reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gently enclosing her smaller ones. "Sleep well, Lily." That night, Xavier lay awake on his bedroll, listening to the soft rhythm of Lily's breathing from the bed across the room. The cabin suddenly felt too small, too intimate, yet he couldn't imagine returning to the solitude of his life before she arrived. February melted into March, bringing longer days and the first tentative signs of spring. The snow began retreating, revealing patches of muddy earth beneath. New green shoots appeared in sheltered areas, and birds returned to the pine trees surrounding the cabin. With the improving weather came increased anxiety. Both Xavier and Lily knew their temporary arrangement had an expiration date, though neither mentioned it directly. Instead, they filled their days with work and their evenings with conversation, savoring the borrowed time. Xavier made one more trip to town, returning with books for Lily and troubling news. Mercer had increased the reward for information about his stepdaughter. There were rumors he might come to Fort McDowell himself to continue the search once the roads improved further. "We need to consider alternatives," Xavier said that evening as they sat by the fire. "Oregon might not be far enough." Lily looked up from the novel she'd been reading. "What do you mean?" "Mercer sounds like a man who doesn't give up easily. If he's this determined to find you, crossing into another territory might not stop him." "What other choice do I have?" Lily asked, closing the book. "I can't spend my life hiding." Xavier had been pondering this very question for weeks. "There's another option," he said carefully. "One that would give you protection under the law." Lily's brow furrowed. "What kind of protection?" "Marriage," Xavier said, the word hanging in the air between them. "As a married woman, your legal status would change. Mercer would have no claim on you whatsoever." Lily stared at him, speechless. Then understanding dawned. "You mean a marriage of convenience to whom?" Xavier met her gaze steadily. "To me, if you were willing." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional pop of wood in the fireplace. Xavier waited, his heart pounding uncomfortably against his ribs. "You would do that?" Lily finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tie yourself to a woman you barely know who brings nothing but danger to your doorstep?" "I know enough," Xavier replied. "I know you're brave and resilient, hardworking, kind." He paused. "And I know that the thought of you leaving sits like a stone in my chest." Lily's eyes widened at this confession. "Xavier, it wouldn't have to be." He searched for the right words. "We could have separate rooms. I wouldn't expect anything from you that you weren't willing to give. But you would have the protection of my name, this land, this home." Lily rose, moving to the window to stare out at the darkening landscape. "You're offering me safety at the cost of your own freedom. It's too much." Xavier stood as well but maintained his distance. "It's my choice to offer, yours to accept or refuse. And if I refuse, if I still plan to leave for Oregon, then I'll give you money for the journey and wish you well," Xavier said, though the words tasted bitter. "But I wanted you to know there was another option." Lily turned to face him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I need time to think." "Of course," Xavier agreed. "There's no rush for your answer." But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Spring was advancing daily, and with it, the roads were becoming more passable. Mercer's search would intensify with the improving weather. That night, Xavier again lay awake, listening to Lily's restless movements in the bed. She wasn't sleeping either, likely turning over his unexpected proposal in her mind. He wondered if he'd overstepped, if he'd made her uncomfortable in what had become a safe haven. Just before dawn, Xavier rose quietly and headed to the barn, needing physical labor to clear his head. He was mucking out stalls when he heard the cabin door open. Looking up, he saw Lily walking toward him, wrapped in his spare coat against the morning chill. "You're up early," he observed, setting aside his pitchfork. Lily stopped in the doorway, framed by the soft light of sunrise. "I've been thinking about your offer." Xavier nodded, afraid to hope. "And it's an incredible kindness," she began, "but I need to understand something first." "Ask me anything." "Is this truly just about protection?" Lily's direct gaze challenged him. "Or is there more to it?" Xavier had been asking himself the same question through the long night. "It started as protection," he admitted. "But if I'm being honest, there's more. Much more." Lily took a step closer. "Tell me, I care for you," Xavier said simply. "More than I expected to, more than might be wise. The thought of you leaving." He shook his head. "I've gotten used to having you here, to your voice, your presence, the way you hum when you're cooking, the way you look first thing in the morning with your hair all tangled." A soft smile touched Lily's lips. "You notice those things?" "I notice everything about you," Xavier confessed. "I tried not to, but I failed miserably." Lily closed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching. "I've been fighting the same battle," she whispered, "telling myself not to grow attached to this place, to you, but every day it gets harder to imagine leaving." Hope flared in Xavier's chest. "Does that mean—" "It means yes," Lily interrupted. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not just for protection, but because I want to build something here. With you." Xavier reached for her then, his hands gently cupping her face. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel obligated or rushed." "I'm certain," Lily assured him. "More certain than I've been about anything in a long time." Xavier bent his head slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. When she didn't, he brushed his lips against hers in a tentative kiss that quickly deepened as Lily responded, her arms encircling his neck. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Xavier pressed his forehead against hers. "We'll need to go to town, find a preacher." "Is that safe?" Lily asked, concern clouding her features. "If Mercer has people looking for me." Xavier considered the problem. "We could ask the preacher to come here. Reverend Wilson makes regular calls to outlying homesteads. I could send word that we need his services." "That would be better," Lily agreed. "The fewer people who see me, the better." They spent the morning planning, an excitement building between them that transformed the simple cabin. What had begun as a practical arrangement had blossomed into something neither had expected to find in the harsh Montana territory: a chance at happiness, at belonging. Xavier rode out that afternoon to a neighboring ranch where he knew he could leave a message for the Reverend without arousing suspicion. He returned with news that Wilson could come the following week, along with the promise of complete discretion. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Lily used fabric Xavier had brought from town to sew herself, a simple but elegant dress. She gathered early wildflowers to decorate the cabin and baked bread and pies for the small celebration afterward. Xavier found himself watching her with a sense of wonder, still hardly believing the turn his life had taken. The solitary existence he'd built had never felt lacking before. Now he couldn't imagine returning to it. The day of the wedding dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved of their union. Reverend Wilson arrived mid-morning, a kind-faced man in his 50s who asked no uncomfortable questions about their hasty ceremony. "The Lord brings people together in his own time and way," the Reverend said simply, when Xavier briefly explained they wished to marry quickly and quietly. Lily emerged from the bedroom, wearing her newly made dress, her hair arranged with the blue ribbon Xavier had bought her. She carried a small bouquet of pine branches and early spring flowers, her cheeks flushed with a combination of nerves and happiness. Xavier, wearing his best shirt and newly polished boots, felt his breath catch at the sight of her. "You're beautiful," he said softly as she joined him before the Reverend. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, conducted in front of the hearth where they had spent so many evenings together. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed his bride with a tenderness that belied the strength of his feelings. After sharing the wedding meal with Reverend Wilson and seeing him off with promises to attend church when possible, Xavier and Lily found themselves alone as husband and wife for the first time. "Mrs. Anderson," Xavier said, testing the sound of it, "has a nice ring to it." Lily smiled, reaching for his hand. "It does, doesn't it? Though I hardly feel deserving of all this happiness after everything that's happened." "Everyone deserves happiness," Xavier assured her, drawing her close. "Especially you, after what you've endured." That night, as they prepared for bed, the previous awkwardness of their arrangement was replaced by a new, sweet tension. Xavier had moved his few belongings back into the bedroom that morning, but he still hesitated at the threshold. "I meant what I said before," he told Lily softly. "I don't expect anything you're not ready for. Lily approached him, her eyes steady on his. "And if I am ready, if I want my husband beside me tonight and every night," Xavier's heart hammered against his ribs as he reached for her, "then I would be the happiest man in Montana territory." Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation of tenderness and passion, of whispered discoveries and shared vulnerability. Xavier, who had known only brief encounters with saloon girls in his younger days, found himself humbled by the depth of emotion he felt with Lily in his arms. For Lily, who had feared such intimacy after the ugliness of her stepfather's intentions for her, Xavier's gentle, considerate love-making healed wounds she hadn't realized were still raw. In his embrace, she found not just pleasure but a profound sense of safety she'd thought forever beyond her reach. As spring bloomed across the Montana landscape, so too did their relationship, growing stronger with each passing day. They worked side by side to prepare for the coming season, planting a larger garden than Xavier had attempted before, repairing winter damage to the barn and corral, preparing for the spring calving. In the evenings, they planned for the future. Xavier wanted to expand the herd, perhaps build a larger home in a year or two. Lily spoke of possibly starting a small school for the children of neighboring ranches, using her love of books to bring education to the isolated community. They were cautious when venturing into Fort McDowell, with Lily keeping to the wagon while Xavier conducted business. As weeks passed without any sign of Mercer or his men, they began to hope that perhaps he had abandoned his search, focusing on his profitable business rather than a runaway stepdaughter. That hope was shattered on a warm day in late April when Xavier returned from checking fence lines to find a strange horse tied outside the cabin. Drawing his rifle from its scabbard, he approached cautiously, heart pounding with fear for Lily. Before he could reach the door, it opened to reveal Marshall Jenkins. Relief flooded through Xavier until he saw the grave expression on the lawman's face. "Marshall," Xavier greeted him, lowering his rifle. "What brings you out this way?" "Came to warn you," Jenkins replied, stepping onto the porch. "Franklin Mercer arrived in town yesterday. He's asking questions, showing your wife's picture around." Xavier's stomach clenched. "Did you tell him anything?" "Nothing to tell," Jenkins said with a shrug. "Far as I'm concerned, Lily Morgan disappeared months ago. Lily Anderson is a respectable married woman living with her husband on his ranch." From inside the cabin, Lily appeared in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "Thank you, Marshall. That's very kind of you." Jenkins nodded to her. "Madam, just doing what's right, but you should know Mercer's not the type to give up easily. He's got 2 men with him, rough-looking sorts. They're planning to start searching outlying properties tomorrow." "On what authority?" Xavier demanded. "None that would stand in court," Jenkins admitted. "But that might not stop them from making trouble. Thought you should be prepared." After the marshal departed with promises to delay Mercer as long as possible, Xavier and Lily sat at their kitchen table, faces grave as they considered their options. "We could leave," Lily suggested. "Head west now before he comes." Xavier shook his head. "This is our home. I won't be driven from it by a man like Mercer." He reached across the table for her hand. "Besides, we're legally married. He has no claim on you anymore." "Law doesn't mean much to Franklin," Lily said quietly. "If he finds me, he'll try to take me back. Not because he particularly wants me, but because I defied him. Because I know things that could damage him if they came to light." "What things?" Xavier asked, realizing there were still parts of her past she hadn't shared. Lily hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "He doesn't just run a saloon and brothel. He's involved in other businesses, opium smuggling, protection rackets. He has ledgers, detailed records of payoffs to officials, of shipments. I found them when I was cleaning his office." That's the real reason he locked me up when I refused to work for him. He was afraid I'd talk." Xavier absorbed this information, understanding now why Mercer had pursued Lily so relentlessly. "Do you have any proof of this?" I memorized some of it. Names, dates, amounts. Enough to cause him serious trouble if I took it to the right authorities. A plan began forming in Xavier's mind. Then perhaps that's our best defense. Not running, not hiding, but standing our ground with the truth as our weapon. The next day, Xavier rode into town alone, meeting with Marshal Jenkins in the privacy of his office. He shared what Lily had told him, watching as the lawman's expression grew increasingly grim. "These are serious allegations," Jenkins said when Xavier finished, "but without physical evidence. Lily's testimony would be enough to justify a search of his properties, wouldn't it? Especially if it came with specific details about where to look." Jenkins considered this. "Possibly, but it would put her at significant risk." "She's already at risk," Xavier pointed out. "At least this way, we fight back instead of just waiting for him to find us." After further discussion, they formulated a plan. Xavier would return to the ranch while Jenkins sent telegrams to territorial authorities and the federal marshal in Helena. In the meantime, Jenkins would keep Mercer occupied in town with bureaucratic delays and misdirection. The waiting was excruciating. Xavier reinforced the cabin's defenses as best he could, keeping weapons loaded and ready. Lily moved through her daily tasks with quiet determination, though Xavier often caught her glancing anxiously toward the road. 3 days passed with no sign of either Mercer or word from Marshal Jenkins. On the morning of the 4th day, Xavier was repairing a wagon wheel when he heard approaching riders. Grabbing his rifle, he moved quickly to intercept them before they reached the cabin. 3 men came into view around the bend in the road. Xavier recognized the lead rider immediately from Lily's descriptions: Franklin Mercer. A well-dressed man in his 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and cold eyes. His companions were exactly the type of hired muscle one would expect: big, armed, and exuding menace. Xavier positioned himself in the middle of the road, rifle held ready but not yet aimed. "That's far enough," he called as they approached. "This is private property." Mercer reined in his horse, studying Xavier with calculation. "You must be Anderson. I've heard about you." His tone was conversational, almost pleasant, but Xavier wasn't fooled. "Then you've heard I don't welcome uninvited guests," Xavier replied evenly. "State your business and be on your way." "I'm looking for my stepdaughter," Mercer said. "Lily Morgan. I have reason to believe she might be in this area. Perhaps you've seen her." "No one by that name here," Xavier said truthfully. "Just me and my wife." A flicker of something, anger, suspicion, crossed Mercer's face. "Your wife? That's interesting. I wasn't aware you were married." "Recent development," Xavier said, maintaining his position. "Now I'll ask you again to state your legitimate business or leave my land." Mercer's pleasant demeanor slipped slightly. "I'm concerned about my stepdaughter's welfare. She's unstable, dangerous even. If you're harboring her, you could be in considerable danger yourself." "The only danger I see right now is 3 armed men trespassing on my property," Xavier replied. "Marshal Jenkins knows you're in the area, and he knows you've been asking questions. If anything happens to me or my wife, you'll be the first person he investigates." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Mercer's companions shifted uneasily in their saddles, glancing at their employer for direction. "I'd like to speak with your wife," Mercer said finally. "To ask if she's seen Lily." "My wife is busy with household tasks," Xavier said firmly. "And we've both told the marshal everything we know, which is nothing. Now I'll thank you to turn around and leave the way you came." For a tense moment, Xavier thought Mercer might order his men to force their way past. Instead, the older man smiled thinly. "Of course. My apologies for the intrusion." He touched the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. "We'll be in the area for a few more days. If you happen to remember anything helpful, you can find me at the hotel in town." The three men turned their horses, but not before Mercer delivered a final, chilling comment. "I always find what belongs to me, Mr. Anderson, one way or another." Xavier watched until they disappeared from view, then hurried back to the cabin where Lily waited anxiously by the window, a shotgun in her hands. "It was him," she said, her voice tight with fear. "I saw him." Xavier nodded, taking the shotgun gently from her trembling hands. "He's gone for now, but he'll be back. We need to move forward with our plan." That afternoon, Xavier rode to a neighboring ranch to send a message to Marshal Jenkins, informing him of Mercer's visit and urging action. When he returned, he found Lily had packed essential supplies and secured the livestock in case they needed to leave quickly. "I won't let him take you," Xavier promised as they ate a simple dinner, both too tense for much appetite. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Lily reached across the table, her fingers intertwining with his. "When I was lost in that snowstorm, I was ready to die," she said softly. "I had nothing left to live for. Then you found me, and gradually I found a reason to live again, to hope again." Her eyes, clear and determined, met his. "I won't let him take that from us." They kept watch through the night, taking turns sleeping while the other remained vigilant. Dawn arrived without incident, bringing with it a fresh sense of resolve. They couldn't live this way indefinitely, something had to give. Mid-morning, they heard riders approaching again. Xavier positioned himself on the porch, rifle ready, while Lily remained inside with the shotgun. This time, however, it was Marshal Jenkins who appeared, accompanied by two unfamiliar men wearing badges. "Anderson," Jenkins called as they dismounted. "This is Deputy Marshal Williams from Helena and Agent Carter from the Treasury Department. They'd like to speak with your wife." Relief washed over Xavier as he lowered his weapon. "They're here about Mercer," Jenkins nodded. "Your message yesterday confirmed what we've suspected for some time. These gentlemen have been building a case against Mercer for months." Inside the cabin, Agent Carter explained the situation to Lily. "We've been investigating Mercer for tax evasion and opium smuggling. What we've lacked is someone with inside knowledge of his operations." "I saw his ledgers," Lily confirmed. "I can tell you exactly where he keeps them, what they contain." For the next hour, Lily provided detailed information about Mercer's business practices, the layout of his office in Virginia City, the names of officials she believed were on his payroll. The agent took copious notes, his expression growing increasingly satisfied. "This is exactly what we needed," he said when she finished. "With this information, we can obtain warrants to search his properties and arrest him on multiple federal charges." "What about Lily's safety?" Xavier asked, his arm protectively around his wife's shoulders. "Mercer knows she's here." "He'll try again." "That's being handled as we speak," Deputy Marshal Williams assured them. Marshal Jenkins provided a description of Mercer and his men. "They're being detained in town right now on suspicion of attempted extortion. Once we have the warrants in hand, they'll be formally arrested." "How long will that take?" Lily asked. "A day, perhaps two," Agent Carter replied. "In the meantime, we'd like you both to come to town where we can ensure your safety." Xavier exchanged glances with Lily, seeing his own reluctance mirrored in her eyes. "We'll stay here," he decided. "This is our home, and we're done running. But we'd appreciate an extra man until Mercer's been dealt with." Deputy Williams volunteered to remain at the ranch, allowing Jenkins and Carter to return to town to send the necessary telegrams. The next day passed in tense waiting, but Mercer made no further appearances. On the morning of the second day, Marshal Jenkins returned with news. "It's done," he announced as he dismounted. "Mercer and his men were arrested last night. They're being transported to Helena to face federal charges." Lily sank onto the porch steps, overwhelming relief evident in every line of her body. "Is it really over?" "As good as," Jenkins confirmed. "Agent Carter would like you to testify once the case goes to trial, but that won't be for months. In the meantime, Mercer will be held without bail. He had quite a collection of incriminating documents just where you said they'd be." Xavier sat beside Lily, taking her hand in his. "You did it. You brought him down." She shook her head. "We did it. I would never have found the courage without you." That evening, after Jenkins and Williams had departed, Xavier and Lily sat on the porch swing Xavier had built the previous week, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in spectacular shades of gold and crimson. "I've been thinking," Xavier said, his arm around Lily's shoulders. "We should add on to the cabin before winter. Another bedroom, maybe." Lily turned to look at him, a question in her eyes. "Are you expecting company?" Xavier smiled, his hand gently moving to rest against her stomach. "Perhaps in about 7 months or so." Lily's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "I wasn't certain myself until yesterday. You've been different the past couple of weeks, tired in the mornings, not interested in coffee." Xavier kissed her temple. "And you keep touching your stomach when you think I'm not looking." Tears of happiness welled in Lily's eyes. "Are you pleased?" "It's sooner than we planned." "Please doesn't begin to cover it," Xavier assured her, drawing her closer. "I love you, Lily Anderson. You and our child to be are everything I never knew I wanted." "I love you too," Lily whispered against his lips. "My rescuer, my reason for living." As darkness settled over the Montana wilderness, they remained on the porch, planning their future with quiet joy. The nightmare of Lily's past had finally been laid to rest, replaced by the promise of tomorrow. Over the next months, Xavier worked tirelessly to expand their home while Lily's pregnancy progressed. The addition included not just a nursery, but a small second bedroom that would eventually become a schoolroom. Lily had not abandoned her dream of educating the children of neighboring ranches, though she planned to wait until their own child was a bit older. Word of Mercer's arrest spread throughout the territory, and with it, the story of Lily's courage in providing the evidence that brought him down. Rather than facing ostracism as she had feared, Lily found herself welcomed by the women of Fort McDowell when she accompanied Xavier to town. Her advancing pregnancy a shield against any lingering suspicion. In late November, as the first snows of winter began to fall, Lily gave birth to a healthy son they named Thomas, after Marshal Jenkins, who had helped ensure their safety. The delivery was long and difficult, but with the assistance of a neighboring rancher's wife who had experience as a midwife, both mother and child emerged safely. Xavier, who had paced anxiously outside the bedroom during the birth, found himself overcome with emotion when he first held his son. The tiny boy with a shock of dark hair and his mother's green eyes represented everything Xavier had never dared hope for: family, continuity, a legacy beyond himself. "He's perfect," Xavier whispered, carefully returning the infant to Lily's arms, "just like his mother." Lily smiled tiredly, the ordeal of childbirth etched in the shadows beneath her eyes. "I think he has your chin, and definitely your stubbornness. He certainly took his time arriving." As winter settled over Montana, the Anderson family established new rhythms in their expanded home. Xavier cared for the livestock and kept the cabin warm and supplied with wood, while Lily focused on recovering her strength and caring for Thomas, who proved to be a contented baby with a healthy appetite and his father's calm disposition. In January, a letter arrived from Agent Carter with news that Mercer had been convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The letter included a bank draft Lily's rightful inheritance from her mother, which had been recovered from Mercer's assets. "What will you do with it?" Xavier asked as they sat by the fire, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby. Lily considered the question. "Some for Thomas's future, some to expand the ranch if you're agreeable, and perhaps—" She hesitated. "Perhaps we could set aside a portion to help other women escape situations like mine. There must be others who need a second chance." Xavier nodded, pride swelling in his chest at his wife's compassionate nature. "I think that's a fine idea." Spring arrived, bringing with it Thomas's first smile, first laugh, and the beginning of what promised to be a determined crawling technique. The garden Lily planted was twice the size of the previous years, and Xavier added 5 new calves to their growing herd. On a particularly beautiful day in May, Xavier found Lily standing on the porch, Thomas balanced on her hip as she gazed out at the mountains in the distance. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, joining them. "I was remembering," Lily replied. "1 year ago I was still living in fear. Now look at us." She gestured to the thriving ranch around them, to their healthy son. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life." Xavier wrapped his arms around both of them, his family, his heart. "Believe it," he said softly. "You fought for this. We both did." Lily turned in his embrace, her free hand reaching up to touch his face. "I was half dead when you found me in the snow," she said. "Not just physically, but inside. You gave me more than shelter or protection. You gave me a reason to live again." Xavier kissed her tenderly, still marveling at his good fortune. "And you gave me a family, a future. Everything." Thomas babbled happily between them, reaching for his father's beard with curious fingers. Xavier took his son into his arms, lifting him high to elicit a delighted squeal before settling him securely against his shoulder. "I was thinking," Xavier said as they walked back into the house together. "Maybe next year we could build that schoolroom you've been planning. Mrs. Johnson from the next ranch over mentioned her girls could use some proper education." Lily's face lit up. "Really? You think we're ready for that?" "I think you're ready for anything," Xavier replied with certainty. "And I'll be right beside you every step of the way." As evening fell across the Montana wilderness, the lights from the Anderson ranch glowed warm and inviting against the deepening blue of the sky. Inside, a family that had been formed through chance, courage, and love prepared for another night together, safe, whole, and filled with hope for all the years to come. What had begun with a desperate rescue in the snow had blossomed into something neither could have imagined: a love strong enough to overcome the darkest past, and a future bright with promise. For Xavier and Lily Anderson, every day was confirmation that sometimes the greatest journeys begin at the moment when all seems lost, and that in the heart of another, one can truly find a reason to live again.